Now, you may have clicked on this video expecting clickbait. While I will concede that I cannot, right now, tell you the winner of the 2024 presidential election, or even give you the nominees. However, I can give you a template of how to predict future elections. In my YouTube career, I've been fairly accurate in predicting presidential elections. I've been saying that Joe Biden will win the 2020 presidential election since April. And assuming the results stand as they do today, I will have been correct in every state except with the exception of Georgia. Before we get started, I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. You liking this video not only encourages me to keep putting out content, but also helps with the YouTube algorithm. I probably won't be able to monetize this video, so if you're able and feel inclined, it'd help me out a ton if you checked out my Patreon, linked in the description box below the video. There are various perks you can get for donating to me, and it helps me improve the quality of videos by allowing me to purchase better equipment. Now, I'll stop the preamble so we can get started. Let's go back 40 years. It is 1980, and for the record, we're reviewing every presidential election since 1980, and comparing the traits of the winners and losers. It is 1980. Jimmy Carter is president. Carter had a real tough time in this election, facing challenges even from within his own party. He had to beat out Ted Kennedy in the primaries to win the nomination, which divided his party. Step 1 to losing an election: have a serious primary challenger. He also had to deal with a struggling economy, which went into recession in January of 1980. Step 2, have a struggling economy. Notice the pattern here? Carter entered office with nearly 2 in 3 Americans approving of him. Yet by the time the election rolled around, it was down to less than 34%. The Republicans picked Ronald Reagan as their candidate, and Reagan did a good job of pointing out Carter's weaknesses, hitting him hard on the Iran hostage crisis and in his handling of the economic recession at hand. Step 3, point out foreign policy failures. Reagan won easily, taking all but 6 states. 4 years later, the economy had improved significantly, and Reagan used this to his advantage. In a debate against Walter Mondale, his Democratic opponent, he famously looked into the camera and asked the American people, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" For many Americans, the answer was yes. Reagan won easily, taking every single state except for Mondale's home state of Minnesota, which he made very close. In 1988, the scene was somewhat similar. The Democrats moved away from Jimmy Carter and nominated Michael Dukakis. Dukakis was a relatively weak candidate, and George H.W. Bush was the popular Ronald Reagan's vice president. Bush campaigned on the economy, but also hit Dukakis hard for his stance on crime. Bush portrayed Dukakis as tough on crime and ran many ads in suburban and Rust Belt areas talking about this. This resulted in strong support for Bush with the white working class, which peaked in the 1980s. This gave him a big win in the presidential election. The 1992 presidential election is fascinating because of how many variables there were. While George H.W. Bush at one point enjoyed an 89% approval rating, which is insanely high, it eventually dipped. There are 2 major factors here. The first is party fatigue, meaning that after 12 years of Republican control, Americans were probably ready for a change, embodied by the young governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton. The second element of Clinton's victory in 1992 was a third-party spoiler effect. Ross Perot took away a lot of votes from Bush, which cost him in many states. Clinton's message resonated with voters who wanted change, which was most of Americans. Notice the trend here? Americans like change. They like it a lot. The 1996 presidential election was a lock for Bill Clinton. The economy was booming, the country was united, and overall Clinton was fairly popular. The Republican Party ran an establishmentarian candidate, Bob Dole. Dole had a really tough time campaigning, and he really had no talking points to challenge Clinton on. He wasn't calling for change because at the time Clinton was super popular. He wasn't calling for more of the same because he was a Republican and couldn't tie himself to Clinton, and if he did, he'd lose a lot of base support. The result was an easy Clinton victory. Since we're basically halfway through these elections now, I want you to think, what is the common theme? I'll tell you at the end, but for now I want you to think about it. Now it's time for stuff to get a little bit more interesting. While the elections from 1980 to 1996 were strong victories for the winner, these next batch of elections have been super tight for the most part. Let's go to 2000, where Vice President Al Gore runs a campaign based on continuing Bill Clinton's success for the most part. At first, it appears as though this is a good idea. Clinton is popular, so if Gore can maintain the votes that Clinton had gotten 4 years prior, he'd win the election. But there's a problem with this strategy, which I'll get to in a second. But let's move on to George W. Bush, whose campaign focused on, you got it, change. Minor change, of course, but this wasn't necessarily a bad idea. After 8 years of Democratic rule, party fatigue came into play in a lot of states. We also have to remember that Bill Clinton's scandals were piling up, specifically the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And in some cases, Gore didn't do a great job of distancing himself from Clinton where it would help him. Another issue that didn't help the Democrats was the Elian Gonzalez controversy, where a young Cuban boy's fate hung in the balance. There's a huge debate on whether he should have been deported, and while Gore did say that Gonzalez should be allowed to stay in the U.S., which was the more popular viewpoint, Clinton had an opposite view, and this hurt Gore's campaign in swing state Florida, a state that would, as we all know, prove to be pivotal. Now, as I said earlier, Gore essentially tying his fate to Bill Clinton appeared to be a good idea, but a good amount of Americans were ready for change and move away from the establishment, which Gore was clearly a part of. The election was incredibly close. Gore held on to most of the Rust Belt, building off of Clinton's success, but he failed in key Sun Belt states like Florida, which cost him the Electoral College. Gore may have won the popular vote, but it's clear as day why he lost in some states like Florida. Change and major policy bungles. 2004 was an interesting year because incumbent presidents with good economies are usually shoo-ins for re-election. But that wasn't the case. First of all, the Democratic Party was really fired up after the devastating defeat in 2000. It's also worth noting that despite having a good economy, George Bush was shaky on foreign policy, and his decision to enter Iraq was very controversial. This was the main talking point of John Kerry, his Democratic opponent. Kerry's slogans were directly aimed at Bush. Two of my favorites are "Help is on the way" and "Make America Respected Again." The election, once again, was very close. Bush won because of the economy. Kerry simply didn't have enough ammo, but, as I mentioned, he still won a lot of key states. 2008 was set up perfectly for the Democrats. George W. Bush was extremely unpopular, mostly due to the war in Iraq, and the country, as I mentioned earlier, was experiencing party fatigue after 8 years of Republican control. To top all of this for the Republicans, in June, the economy crashed, causing the 2008 recession, the Great Recession, known to some. The Democrats ran on change, nominating Barack Obama, who, yes, used change as a campaign slogan. He won on its side, easily beating McCain. Now, McCain, as I mentioned earlier, was older, establishment, didn't really have anything to run on. And he couldn't have just tied himself to Bush because, Bush was unpopular, and had he been running for a third term, would have gotten destroyed. But he didn't want to lose his base support, so he couldn't really tie himself to the Democratic Party either. Obama also won re-election in 2012 with a fairly big win. He had a strong economy and was pretty popular, and he beat an establishment Republican, Mitt Romney. See, as you can notice, running establishmentarian candidates against incumbents is never a good idea. Think, when was the last time that an establishmentarian-type candidate beat an incumbent? I'll wait. The last time that happened, I don't even know. I'd have to sit here for a few seconds. The closest thing I can think of in recent memory would be John Kerry in 2004, but Bush wasn't super popular compared to Obama. The Republicans, when they ran Romney, that wasn't a great idea for them. Voters generally like change, but when you have an incumbent president running against an establishmentarian-type candidate, nothing really screams change there. Now let's move on to 2016, which you can see on your screen. So, yes, I'm going to get copyrighted for this if I attempt to monetize the video, but let's just take a look at this right now. The current electoral map you're seeing is obviously not final, as many states have yet to be filled in, but look at the states that Clinton has already won, same with Trump. Now, it just faded away, but Trump won a lot of Rust Belt states that election, and that was pivotal to his campaign, as we all know. So, Donald Trump, I think he was poised to win that election from the moment he declared. Not necessarily from the moment he declared, but by the time that it was going to be a Trump versus Clinton matchup, at least. Now, I say this because, 2016 was a populist year. The political climate, and if you're taking notes, underline that and highlight it and circle it, the political climate favored Trump 100%. The Rust Belt and white working class was angry for a very long time. They hadn't gotten a raise since the 1980s. It's also worth noting that Hillary Clinton was full of scandals, so Trump used that to hurt her, branding her as Crooked Hillary. Now, you could say that Trump has scandals, which he does, for the record, but his blunt manner and his I say what I think type of campaign really helped him dodge a lot of scandals that could have hurt him. Imagine if Mitt Romney had been hit by the Access Hollywood tapes. He might have even lost a bunch of solidly Republican states. But with Donald Trump, he basically was unfazed and was able to win the election. Now, of course, he lost the popular vote, and he's still very unpopular right now. He just lost re-election 4 years later. But it's still worth noting that he won in key places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Iowa, and Ohio. The reason that he won in these areas was because of populism. This is a populist year. People were sick and fed up of the establishment. That's exactly what Hillary Clinton was part of, the establishment. So, before we move on to 2020, let's just briefly go over since 1980. 1980, people wanted change. In 1984, people wanted more of the same. So it's change, normalcy. 1988, people wanted more of the same, normalcy. 1992, people wanted change. 1996, normalcy. 2000, change. 2004, somewhat change. Again, it's very hard to brand 2004, certainly. But we can say normalcy. 2008, it was definitely change. 2012, it's normalcy. So you're noticing that when incumbents have strong economies, which Obama, Reagan, and Clinton all had, it's fairly easy for them to win re-election. Now, I'm not going to be one of those people who piggybacks off, it's the economy, stupid, because I think that's not entirely true. To quote Stanley Greenberg, it's the middle class, stupid. It's fair to say, certainly, that the economy plays a big role in deciding presidents, but I think the middle class, and the white working class, particularly in states like Michigan and Ohio, are really the ones who decide the president. Now, let's move on to 2020, of course. I don't know why I just said 2000, but 2020, excuse me. The coronavirus pandemic hits. Black Lives Matter protests and even riots sometimes are very prominent, especially over the summer. And the economy is in recession, the worst economy since the Great Depression. Now, this election was very close, obviously. I'm not going to be one of those people who said it's a landslide. But we also have to remember that Donald Trump was able to win a bunch of key states like Ohio, Iowa, Florida, and North Carolina. It's not like he didn't win a single swing state. But let's move on to the states that decide the election: Pennsylvania, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Particularly the Rust Belt, which we're going to focus on. And if you haven't noticed, Pennsylvania seems to always go for the winner, with the exception of 2000 and 2004. And Pennsylvania did decide this election. So, yeah. Now, I think that Joe Biden ran a good campaign overall. He had some blunders, yes, that is certainly not deniable. But we have to remember that in a state like Pennsylvania, the white working class decides that state. Of course, the Democrats have high turnout from Philly, the Republicans have high turnout from the suburbs to win the state, but it's the white working class who decides the state. The white working class, the economy was tanking, BLM protests and sometimes riots, as I mentioned, were really peaking, especially in July and August. So we have to remember that. And Donald Trump, the country was in chaos. Multiple surveys found that 8 in 10 Americans weren't even proud to be American, which is horrible. And in a bad year for incumbency, voters blamed it on the president. That is a huge deal. And that's why Donald Trump lost this election, and lost the popular vote by a margin we haven't seen since John McCain in 2008. So I think it's pretty clear why Biden won. Normalcy. People wanted a return to politics as usual. That's just what they wanted. It's a fact. Whether you support him or not, that's part of the reason why he won and got more votes than Donald Trump did. Now, we've laid out the results of the past elections, and it did take us 30 minutes to do it. But this is important because we have to realize the political climate. And that's how you decide an election. That's how you forecast an election, the political climate. And just to look at the past few elections in like 2012 or 2008 even. 2008, change. People were sick of George W. Bush and Republican control. What they really wanted was a better economy because it was tanking, and they wanted better foreign policy. Barack Obama, he was able to use that message. Certainly, he lost some states, of course, as I mentioned, but still, he won in places the Democrats hadn't won since like FDR, Indiana, or Barry Goldwater, since Barry Goldwater ran for president. Indiana hadn't gone blue in like 60 years or something like that. North Carolina hadn't gone blue in a while. So, I think that this is important to look at. 2008, change was the theme. 2012, since the economy wasn't bad, since there were no major foreign policy blunders, it was easy to see why Obama won. And in 2016, people were sick of the establishment. They wanted something else. They wanted a newcomer. That's why Donald Trump, as shown on your screen, winning Utah, was elected president in 2016. 2020, people wanted to return to politics as usual, normalcy. That's why Joe Biden was elected. He may be establishmentarian, but in a year like this, I think that's perfect for him. So, political climate is just the way to look at it. Of course, there are other variables, and And political climate doesn't tell you how to predict every state. And although I did have a good record on states, which you can go check out my other videos, political climate is the best way to determine an election. The closest model or forecast to this I can think of is the 13 Keys by Alan Lichtman, which is a great way to forecast elections. He was right again in 2020. But it's still very, very important that we remember the political climate. And I'm saying very important a lot, but political climate, that's how you win elections. It's just simply how you predict elections. So, again, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you feel able, please do donate to my Patreon. Again, I'm not going to call, excuse me, I just saw the just called on my screen. I got distracted. I'm not going to beg you to do it, but please, if you can, and if you're able, and if you feel inclined, and if you would like to receive perks, you are more than welcome. So, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Share with your other political nerd friends. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you, and goodbye.